Thank you. Thank you for joining with me today. And I'm going to share my screen and bring up just a second here.
Wrong screen.
Hold on. Sorry.
It should let you, choose which one.
Okay, hold it. Let me go up to the beginning. Do you see it?
Yes, ma'am, we see it.
Okay, slideshow from current slide. There we go. There. Okay, we're going to talk today about relapse and recovery during difficult times. And I'm so glad that you joined me today. And again, I'll reiterate that anytime you have a question, just click on raise my hand. I'll be happy to stop and answer any questions. And I'll also give time at the end of the presentation to answer any questions that maybe we, on topics that maybe we haven't discussed during the presentation, but I'm happy to stop and answer any questions as we go along. So difficult times, that's what our world is experiencing right now. We have a lot going on in our world right now. We've had an opioid epidemic across our nation and really across the world for the last decade. The healthcare providers are prescribing more painkillers than they have ever had in the past, over the past several decades. But 12 to 29% of patients that are prescribed opioids for chronic pain misuse them. And that's what's led in our nation to this opioid epidemic, where more and more people are becoming addicted to pain medications, and having issues that are related to that. Since 1999, the overdose rates for opioids has increased 6 times. In the 2018 data, reports that 128 people in the United States die from an overdose of opioids every single day. So it really is a big concern here in the United States. So with the increased use of injection drug use, that's contributed to the spread of infectious disease. And right now in our world, not only are we having here in the United States an opioid epidemic, but of course across the world we're having COVID-19, the pandemic, which just adds to everybody's fear and anxiety. Beginning back in March, when things started shutting down because of COVID-19 for our own safety, to keep everybody safe, those shutdowns have created some unrest. You'll see more and more that the racial tensions across the world have increased. And it's also an election year. So all of this combined, the opioid epidemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, the racial tensions across the world with the increased tensions involved with that, as well as with the election. We have social media. People are very verbal about their political views on social media. And all this stress in our world that we're experiencing right now has increased anxiety and tensions across the world. And when anybody is overwhelmed with tension, anxiety, we tend to, as humans, to revert back to our old coping mechanisms that have worked for us in the past. Now, I put that in quotes, worked for us in the past, because when I say that, I don't mean that it was something healthy. It worked in a healthy way. People tend to develop coping mechanisms sometimes that aren't necessarily healthy. And a lot of individuals who are early in their recovery or even late in their recovery began using as a coping mechanism to deal with any emotional pain, physical pain that they've been experiencing in the past. And when they started using substances such as drugs or alcohol, they found that that pain was eased by a numbing sensation and helped them to get through what it is that they're getting through, even though it was in an unhealthy way. And so as humans, we just tend to revert to those old coping skills, whether they're healthy or unhealthy. And people who are struggling with addiction, the pandemic and everything else that's going on in our world right now presents some really unique challenges. And so we're going to look at some of those unique challenges that they're experiencing and talk about them a little bit and problem solve about some of the things that maybe they can do to help with that. And it's not just people who are in recovery, but um, substance use affects not only the person that's dealing with the addiction themselves, but affects the whole family and everyone around them and the community as a whole. And so you may be on this session today, not for your own addiction struggles, but maybe there's someone in your family or clients that you're working with that are struggling with addiction. And hopefully we'll be able to give you some tips and about how you can help those individuals that are in your life that may need to have some additional support during this time. So let's look a little bit about what they're struggling with. People who struggle with addiction, the odds are already stacked against them. The National Institute on Alcohol and Alcoholism estimate that 88,000 people die every year from alcohol-related deaths. And that makes it the third leading preventable cause of death in the United States. And people who use substances are 6 times more likely to commit suicide. So it has a ripple effect. So let's talk about the pandemic. Things started shutting down in the United States and really across the world, but specifically we're talking about the United States since about mid-March. And during that first week, that things started shutting down, alcohol sales increased by 55%. Again, you know, a lot of people are using this as a coping mechanism. More stress leads to increased substance use across the nation. And the first 7 weeks after things started shutting down in the United States, the people started reverting to ordering alcohol online and having it delivered to their homes. Different places of business have been shut down, so their access to alcohol was limited. And so people started having it sent to their home, and online alcohol sales increased by 243% in that first 7-week period once things started shutting down from the pandemic. So to me, that was just astounding to think that it increased that much, and just really how big of a problem that it was. So let's talk about the closing down of businesses. People who were early in their recovery, or maybe even people who were later in their recovery, with the closure of the liquor stores. Remember I talked about it has a ripple effect. What started happening when the stores started closing down and it was a little bit harder to get the things that we need, and then other things such as liquor, the emergency rooms started becoming flooded with individuals that were going through withdrawal symptoms, that were using alcohol as their substance of choice. When a person withdraws from alcohol that has become addicted to it, they can experience such things as seizures and very life-threatening types of symptoms. And so the emergency rooms started becoming flooded with problem in the healthcare system in the emergency rooms of not only were they dealing with COVID, they were dealing with higher increase of people who were relapsing. So we want to talk about why. Why was this happening? Why are more and more people relapsing during this time? Well, let's think about it. Social connections are probably the biggest key component to recovery from any kind of addiction. Um, AA, NA, Celebrate Recovery, those types of support groups, people who are in early recovery and even in long-term recovery really depend on these support groups to help them make it from day to day to be able to sustain a drug-free and an alcohol-free lifestyle. And when COVID hit and things started shutting down, those meetings came to a halt. Those in-person meetings came to a halt. So people were faced with isolation and loneliness. And for many, that isolation and loneliness were triggers for them to use in the first place. So we started seeing more and more people relapsing. There were people who may have been in their recovery for many, many, many years, all of a sudden started relapsing again and returning back to old unhealthy coping mechanisms and started using. And why is that? When you think about that, a lot of people were struggling with grieving over their former way of life. You know, this pandemic has been going on for 9 months now. And so for some, it's really hard it's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel when there's not a vaccination out there yet and people are waiting. People are losing their jobs due to the pandemic and people having to be furloughed or businesses having to cut back and cut staff. So their formal way of life, even people who don't struggle with recovery from substances are going through this sense of grief and loss for their old life. And so there are individuals who may not have had a substance use problem in the past, all of a sudden now are. They're turning to alcohol or drugs to relieve some of that emotional pain and grief and loss that they're experiencing. So now we have, not only are we dealing with the opioid epidemic and the COVID, the racial tensions, the political tensions that we're going through, but now we're having people, seeing more and more people in our families, in our communities that are turning to substance use as a coping mechanism. So it has that ripple effect. So anybody that's in recovery, that those connections that they had before, now all of a sudden they're having to find other ways to make those connections, and it can create a threat to their stability and their sobriety. So let's look at some of the ways that that's affecting the world. The AA, the NA, Celebrate Recovery, those communities realized right away that what was happening. They were trying to stay connected via phone with sponsors from AA groups, were calling, checking in with the people that they sponsor and finding that people were relapsing because of that loss of connection. And so pretty quickly, AA and NA started having virtual meetings available. And that was great. That did help a lot of people being able to connect that way through Zoom and Microsoft Teams and various social media. But there were still some problems with that. A lot of people, especially people who were early in their recovery, may not have the access to the technology that they needed to connect to a social or virtual support group. A lot of people who were early in their recovery or just entering into treatment were in a situation where they were heavy in their addiction just before COVID hit. And people who are heavy in their addiction sometimes revert to selling their personal possessions in order to support their habit. So many of them didn't have computers to begin with to be able to connect virtually. There were a lot of people that were either furloughed, or the businesses that they worked for had to cut down on staff and they lost their jobs. And even though they may have had a computer at home, they had to give up their internet access or their cable access or things of that nature just to be able to have enough money to put food on the table and to pay their rent. And so they may have a computer, but they don't have internet access. So a lot of people were cut off in that way and not able to make those connections and have that support. And without that support and feeling extremely overwhelmed, they would revert back to those unhealthy coping mechanisms. For those that were able to get on virtually, there's still some challenges there. And things that we're seeing with that, there are a lot of people who are in recovery that live in homes that have multiple families within the home, or they're living temporarily. They've lost their housing due to their substance use, and they've had to move in with other people. And so when you have more than one family within a home at the same time, confidentiality and finding a little area of the home that is safe to be able to participate in a support group such as AA or NA, where very sensitive issues are being discussed, it made it a little challenging. Another thing that we've heard clients report back to us, their hesitancy to get onto a virtual AA meeting is the confidentiality. Some people would be on and not really pay attention to what's going on in the background in the home behind them. You'd see people walking in and out of the room while they're in a session, a support group. And so the hesitancy to share was challenging, because you don't know who's going to walk into the room or who's going to hear you, and that confidentiality. A lot of people were hesitant to even participate in an AA meeting because of that. And then a lot of people just have some social anxiety, and that may be why they turn to substance use in the first place. Many of people with social anxiety a lot of times will turn to substance use because they report that using the substance helps calm them down and help them be more social. And it takes away that fear of being in public. And so joining a brand new group, a support group, it would be difficult for them under any circumstances. So you have the challenges there with the virtual support groups, but it does help to at least have that availability, that some places are opening up, and you're seeing more and more virtual support groups out there. So if that's something that, if you're struggling with recovery, I want to encourage you to try to find a virtual support group that you can connect with. And if you need a list of some of them that are out there, give our agency a call, and we'll be happy to give you a list of some of those that are available. We'll talk about that at the end with the questions and answers. But another thing that you have to consider that's been a challenge during the pandemic, when things started shutting down and a lot of people had to resort to working from home. We have the choice right now with their children of them attending in person for school or being homeschooled. And a lot of people have chosen to have their children at home as a protective measure. But then you have more of the family there in the home together, and trying to juggle working from home, making sure that the children are doing what they need to do in school. And so homes, there's a lot of tension in a lot of homes right now. You've heard that phrase, absence makes the heart grow fonder. That's very true. Have you ever noticed when you're on vacation with your family, and you may have looked forward to this vacation and been excited about it, and then you're spending a whole week together when you're used to each going to work and the kids going to school, and then you're coming together for the evening. But when you're together 24/7, tensions start to grow and you start getting on each other's nerves. So it's not any different in the family home. Tensions are going to rise a little bit more because people are spending more time confined together in the home. And so people start to have more tensions than they used to have. When you could each go to your separate work, and the kids could be at school, and then you just come home together, the more time that you spend together, of course, the more tension, the more opportunity for tension arises. And so people are desperate for some kind of a release during the day when you're confined for long periods of time together. And so it's going to be real important if you're in recovery to identify what activities can you get involved in that can help relieve some of that stress. And even people who are not in recovery from substance use, this is true of anybody. We all need to find some stress relieving activities during the pandemic to kind of get to ourselves and be able to relieve some of that stress that builds up throughout the day. So let's look at some ideas of how we can do that. So take a time out. I'm going to take a time out here for just a second to remind the people that are listening that Peace River Center does have a crisis line that's available 24 hours a day. You see the number of the crisis line right there on your screen, 519-3744. So jot that number down somewhere where you have it handy. And anytime that you feel like you just need to talk through an issue, you're struggling with an issue, it doesn't necessarily have to be substance use. Or if you are in recovery and you're struggling with cravings to use and you just need to talk to somebody to talk you through that, call that number at any time of the day or night, and somebody will be there to help you through that. Some ideas to just take a time out for yourself. Get outside. You know, the vitamin K from the sunshine is very good at lifting your mood, and it gives you just a chance to get some fresh air and change your perspective about things, even if it's just a 30-minute walk around your neighborhood or in your backyard. But just getting outside every now and then and walking around and will help. You can also put on headphones, listen to some relaxing music. A lot of our clients are reporting that they're listening to podcasts. They're finding some motivating podcasts that they're listening to that just uplifts them for the day. Another thing is getting back to your old hobbies, or if you don't already have a hobby, starting a new hobby. I know my husband is, he's been working at home since the beginning of March. He works for State Farm, and they made the decision there that everybody was going to be working from remotely from home and not come into the office. So he gets cramped in throughout the day, and he said, I start a new hobby, and he bought himself a saw. So he's out in the garage sawing wood all, in the evening, and that's relaxing to him. Now, it's not relaxing to me. I go out there in the garage and there's sawdust everywhere. So it's relaxing for him, not so much for me. So when you're in there together, you got to find ways to kind of meet everybody's needs and be able to work together to make sure everybody has some time to themselves. But that's his place. I let him go in there, and I just stay out of the garage. So think of different ways. Here's some more while you're staying at home of different things that you can do to possibly get through some of the boredom and the relieve some of that stress and anxiety. One of the most important things is follow a predictable schedule. Your regular routine. Try not to get out of your routine. Even though you're working from home, and maybe the kids are doing their schoolwork at home, you need to be as much in a routine as possible. So stay dressed for the day. If you're working from home, dress for work. Your children are doing their schoolwork at home. If they have school uniforms, have them dress in their school uniforms so that their mindset is ready. Okay, this is time for work, or this is time for school. And you're able then to have some kind of a schedule or routine that you can predict, that you can rely on. If you need to talk to somebody, I know a lot of places have been shutting down. Things are starting to open back up, and then you'll see some businesses shutting back down. But a lot of the agencies, Peace River included, offer telehealth services. So don't be afraid if you're afraid to leave your home and don't really want to get out in the public that much for fear of COVID-19 and keeping yourself safe, consider telehealth services. So that's an option you should keep in mind. Other things are journaling, just getting down your thoughts on paper. That's very therapeutic for a lot of individuals. Praying, meditation, yoga, cooking, involving the whole family, making cooking a family effort. Again, spending some time outside, getting that fresh air, that vitamin K that you need to uplift your moods. And then look for a support group, an online support group, to kind of be able to connect with other people who are in the same kind of situation that you are. So one of the things that happens with people who are in early recovery, we see this time and time and time again, even before COVID-19 hit. As individuals in early recovery would get overstressed and overwhelmed with trying to maintain a drug and alcohol-free lifestyle out in the community, and they would have different life stressors hitting them, they would think, okay, I'll just take one drink or one dose of that medication just to get myself calmed down so that I can get through this. I'll just have one and then I can stop. That rarely is successful. So if you're early in recovery and you find yourself, your mind going there, thinking, okay, just one just to get me through the day, start a list. Keep paper and pen handy and start making a list of those reasons of why you are in recovery. What is your commitment to recovery? Is it your kids? You want to be there for your kids. You want to be a better parent for your children and be able to provide for them. You want to be able to keep your home and your job. You may have lost jobs and friendships and family relationships to your use in the past. Is this motivating you to stay in treatment, to stay in recovery? So keep that list available. Put it in your pocket. If you're a woman, put it in your purse. Post it up on your dashboard in your car, up by your mirror in your bathroom when you're getting ready. Someplace where you're going to see that list throughout the day to remind you of why you want to remain in recovery. What motivates you to keep that? And everybody in recovery should have an accountability partner. It could be your spouse. It could be anyone that you trust. It could be your pastor. It could be your best friend. But somebody that's going to keep you accountable. And a lot of times people in early recovery, when they start going toward that path where they stop going to AA meetings, and they're finding themselves kind of going toward use again. A lot of times the other person, your accountability partner, will recognize those signs before you do. And so part of the responsibility of an accountability partner is to hold that person responsible and say, hey, I've noticed you started isolating more, or hey, I noticed you haven't been coming to getting on to the virtual AA meetings. I haven't seen you on there. What's going on? So an accountability partner, if you're not living with the person, if it's not somebody within their own household or family, give them a call every couple of days just to check in, or every day if possible, and say, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? What do you need help with? And just being a support for that person right now and increasing it during this time will be extremely helpful to someone who's in recovery. So keep that in mind. And if you're in recovery and you don't have an accountability partner yet, my suggestion is to find one quickly and just talk to them about it. Keep in touch on a daily basis. So remember, there's the number for the crisis line. We want you to be able to call it at any time that you need for any emotional support about any issue that you need. We want you to be able to call. If you're someone in recovery that has maybe inner treatment, or you find that you just need the additional support right now, and you would like to have some substitute services, which can be counseling, it can be group therapy. It all starts with an evaluation, and there's the phone number right there, the 248-3311 number, where you can call to schedule an appointment. So we want you to be able to access that if you can. I'm going to put my contact number up here. And first, here's the resources, the list of resources. This presentation, this PowerPoint, I'm sure is going to be made available to you on our website so that you can go back and refer to it if you'd like. And there's some resources there that I've listed. And right here is my contact information. Feel free to call at any time with any additional questions that you may have or questions about the services that we offer. But Jessica and Carly, I'm going to open this up for any questions and discussion that anybody might have. So
I know on a lot of the pre-questions that we got, we have a lot of, I think, people who are in social work, case managers and so forth. So they are dealing with families that are experiencing substance use challenges. So I know you've given us some great tips, but is there anything else that you can recommend for ways that they can help support those individuals?
yes, if the person's ready to get some services, offer to go with them. Offer to go with them if you can find an AA or NA or Celebrate Recovery group that's meeting in person with safety precautions put in place, or if you're doing it online, offer to join them in those efforts. Offer to be an accountability partner. Ask them, just come right out and ask them, hey, I know you're struggling with your recovery right now, but who's your accountability partner? Do you have somebody that you can talk to? I want to make myself available to you. So just the extra support and not being judgmental. If a person tells you that they're having urges to use, that they're encountering triggers that's making them have a craving, don't react in a judgmental fashion. A lot of times people that they'll tell that to, they all overreact and say, are you going to start using again? And then they'll be more accepting of that. That's a natural process that happens in the brain. Cravings are a normal part of recovery, and it doesn't mean that the person's backsliding or that they're going to use. They need to be able to talk about their cravings and their urges to use. So allow that conversation to happen and to offer that emotional support to help get them through that and talk them through that. The average time that an urge lasts is 1 minute. Now, it doesn't mean that 5 minutes later they won't have another urge, but the average time is 1 minute. So if you can help talk them through that during a time when an urge comes, to get them through that, then it'll get easier as it goes along. It doesn't mean that 5 minutes later they won't have another urge. Some things that I tell people who are in recovery that are experiencing urges is to put a little game or something on their phone that they could do for 1 minute to distract them. Distraction is the best means of getting through an urge to use, just to be distracted during that time. And you may have to do it over and over throughout the day, but to distract yourself during an urge. It's when they start ruminating over the urge that then they'll go the extra step and start planning to use and end up relapsing. So anything that you can do to help them, but if they're hiding it for fear of talking about it to you and letting you know that they're experiencing urges, then they're going to ruminate, and that's what leads to relapse. So you want to help them through those urges and cravings. So help them, use the crisis line, use each other, just to talk through those urges. Did that answer your question a little bit?
Yes, I think so. If anybody wants to type in any questions, or if you provided a question that hasn't been answered yet, feel free to do that using the chat, the Q&A. You can raise your hand. And I think Carly was going to read another one from the list.
Yes, we do have another one that came in prior to the webinar. So for an individual who is in recovery, how could this person turn a relapse into an opportunity to strengthen their recovery journey?
Individuals learn from every relapse, but a lot of times the people who are going through it they don't recognize those triggers quick enough. And then when they happen, a lot of times they need help talking through it in order to get the most benefit that you're talking about. They need to go through the steps that relapse doesn't happen the moment that they take a drink or they take that dose of medication or whatever it is that they're addicted to. It doesn't happen once they take it. It's that thought process beforehand. The relapse begins when the thoughts start going through their head and they start planning it out of how to get it, how to obtain it, and then following through with it. And so it's real important to recognize the steps that led up to using. And it could be such things. That's why recognizing your own triggers is real important. We really stress that to individuals that do come into treatment, because that's where relapse starts, is when you encounter those triggers and then you start thinking about them and turning it over in your head and then planning it out. And so triggers can be a feeling, loneliness, boredom. It could be isolation, isolating yourself. It could be sights or sounds that were present during the time when you were using. And so it's real important to really self-analyze your past using behaviors. You might have to go back to that and think of the times when you were using and what was present in your environment when you were, that might be triggering you later on in life. When they encounter one of those triggers, that's when the thought of using comes up. So it's just really analyzing what's going on in your life leading up to the relapse and recognizing what those triggers are, and then making a plan for when you encounter those triggers. And it might mean driving yourself to events, because a lot of times family events, the holidays are coming up, and there's a lot of parties and different family events that people will plan. And sometimes that might involve alcohol. And if alcohol is your substance of choice, and you go to a family event, if you rode with your family or another family member to the event, and then there's drinking involved that's triggering you, you can't really remove yourself from that because you don't have the transportation. You rode with somebody else. So providing your own, you have to plan ahead, planning for your own transportation to places so that you can leave if it gets too triggering for you, and you can leave. Also, if you know that alcohol is going to be served at an event and you know that that's a trigger for you, can politely decline and not attend. So there's different ways of your life really changes. You have to really plan ahead. You have to have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. Have those phone numbers handy in your phone to call for someone to help talk you through those situations. If you find yourself in a situation that it's not easy to walk away or remove yourself, call someone, walk into another room, call someone to help you through that.
And we do have another participant question. So this participant would like to know, if you know somebody who is struggling with substance use, but they're in denial and do not think they have a problem, how could you as a loved one help them?
If you feel like it's to the point where it's beyond their control and they've developed an addiction, there is a legal aspect that you can do called the Marchman Act. And that takes 2 or more family members, or it could be neighbors, it could be other people that have observed the behaviors of the person and the problems that it's caused the person. You can go down to the probate office in the courthouse and do what's called a Marchman Act. And then what will happen, they'll ask you some questions about what seems to be the problem with the substance use, what behaviors have you noticed, how have you noticed it impacted their life. You fill out that form, it's presented to a judge. And if the judge says, yes, okay, I think this person may need treatment, then they can go out. The law enforcement is the one who goes out and picks up the person and brings them in, and they will to a detox unit, and then they are required to go through an evaluation before they can be released. And then the evaluation is turned into the court system with what recommendations, if any, of treatment that may be needed. So I know that's tough love. That's hard to do for a lot of families, but that is an option that you can do if the person has a serious problem and is not willing to admit to the problem. That's one thing that a family and or close individuals to that and to the person who's using can do.
Thank you, Donna. So one of our next questions is sort of related to that. It says, I want to be able to understand and relate to relapse and recovery to help a loved one. So do you have tips for, I know you mentioned earlier to not be judgmental, so how do you balance that fear of them harming themselves again, and getting into that situation versus trying to be supportive?
Right. Relapse is part of recovery. Most people who are in early recovery, it takes a couple of times before they're successful. So a relapse doesn't mean that they're not attempting to try to remove themselves totally from the drug of choice or alcohol or drug of choice. And so it's to be expected that may happen. And it's that's just when the family and those loved ones around them need to increase their support around the person and be there for them. Some things that families have done to help people in their family that are struggling with recovery, you may agree to become their financial person. If the person, if money is a trigger for the person, and if they have money in their hand, they're going to buy their substance of choice. With that, they may need help with someone to handle their money and help them through that, so that they don't have that opportunity to spend their money on the substance of choice. To be their accountability partner, to call and check in with them on an everyday basis. If they notice things such as the person's isolating or just behaviors that the individual has identified, when you see me doing this, this is generally what I do before I relapse. Have them share that information with you so that you can help monitor that and increase your support when you start noticing those symptoms. Offer to go to their individual sessions with them if they're comfortable with that. There are NA meetings that family members can attend of people who use substances. A lot of times that's helpful. There are support groups out there for family members of people where they can understand addiction better. So many times they'll say, well, they just need to stop. Well, that's not possible at that point. The person's not capable at that point. They have to get to that level. When the brain becomes addicted to a substance, there's a chemical imbalance that happens in the brain. And so it's not something that they can just stop from their own willpower. It's something that they have to work through and adjust. And they're going to go through different cravings. Think about it. People who've never used substances, the way I try to explain it to them is, have you ever been on a diet? And a lot of people, most people at some point in their life have tried to diet. And usually that time that, even if they're really great at it and they're really committed and they really stick to their diet, the fall off point is usually around about the 12 weeks into it, the 3 month, we call that the danger zone, because there's something that happens in your brain when your brain's addicted to a substance, and it doesn't have to be drugs or alcohol. The substance can be sugar. The substance can be carbohydrates. So when your body gets addicted to a substance, coffee, and then you go without it for a period of time, your body goes into what we call that starvation mode, and the cravings increase even into the unconscious level, and people start dreaming about it. And so once that happens, the support needs to be increased around that time. So if you've ever gone on a diet, I try to tell people to think about, that time where you kind of fell off the wagon on your diet and the cravings that you experience. It's no different. That's because there's something in the brain that kicks in around that point when they get into that starvation mode. And so it's not something it's not something that you can control consciously. And so people who are living with people or supporting people who are in recovery need to understand that concept.
One of the things I just wanted to share, I have an immediate family member. This is Jessica Lawson, by the way, from Community Relations. I have an immediate family member who's been in recovery now probably for almost 10 years. And he says that it is his individual day-by-day choice, and sometimes, depending on the circumstances, his hour-by-hour choice. So I think really understanding that from a helper/family member standpoint was something that really helped me, understand that I could be there and support him, absolutely, but also to know that ultimately he's the one that has to make that decision. So that's just been, that's been helpful. The other question I wanted to see if you wanted to address, Donna, was about who would benefit from the medication-assisted treatments.
There's several different medications that are out there. For opioid and alcohol, we have naloxone. And what that does is it binds the receptors so that the opioid, if a person's using opioid or alcohol, that's their drug of choice, their substance of choice. When they ingest it, what creates that high is it binds to those receptors in the brain and it creates that high. The naloxone or Vivitrol, either one, Vivitrol is the injection form, then naloxone is the oral form of the medication. It attaches to those receptors in the brain and it doesn't allow the opioids or the alcohol to attach itself to those receptors in the brain. So no high or euphoria is felt from the substance. And so that's how that works. Person that does use those types of medications need to be in treatment at the same time for their addiction, because they need to constantly be reminded of, with every medication, of course, there's risk. And so what happens sometimes with people who are on that medication, if they're deep in their addiction and they're still seeking that euphoria that the substance provided for them, if they're taking that medication and it's blocked, sometimes if they continue to use the substance, even though they're on the medication, to try to get that euphoric feeling, they can accidentally overdose. So they have to be monitored very, very closely. And then there are some other medications too that can help with different types of substance, but they really need to be monitored on a regular basis. But for many, that's what made the difference for them. That's what helped them to be able to get through. Suboxone is another one that is actually the substance, so that they don't go through those withdrawal. They have the substance in their body, but not the euphoric high that's related to it. And then the Suboxone is decreased little by little over time to help wean them off the substance. So it keeps them from having the withdrawal symptoms, but it doesn't give them the high either. And so it slowly is weaned down. So there's different types, and depending on the individual and their coping mechanisms and where they're at in their recovery and their addiction, the provider can decide which medication would be best for that individual. So that's also something that they could request in treatment, that we look at medication-assisted types of treatments.
Perfect, thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions? I think we just popped up with one. In Highlands County, the drug of choice is meth. What is available for treatment?
The treatment would be the same as it would be for any other substance, as far as learning about addiction. The treatment itself, you learn about addiction, you learn about the effects of the various different types of drugs that you're using on the body. You learn about coping skills and what types of coping skills are needed to support your recovery efforts in the community. And then you learn these different things in group therapy, where you're learning the concepts about this. And then each individual that's in the treatment has individual therapy, where they discuss, okay, how am I able to incorporate all these concepts that I'm learning about in treatment, in group therapy, into my daily life? What are my barriers to treatment? What am I struggling with right now? And so it's a combination of learning those concepts, learning those coping skills, and then working with a therapist to help incorporate those into your daily life.
And Donna, we do have another question that just popped up. So is it possible to become addicted to Suboxone? And if so, what would happen in that situation?
Yes, there are people, especially if their addiction is very, very strong, it takes them a long period of time to be weaned down to where they can be completely off of it. For some, that was the only way that they could resist and be able to stop. So for some, Suboxone is the answer. For others, the other types of medication treatment may be a better choice. That's why it's good to come in and discuss this with the provider, so that they can figure out what the best choice is for you.
Do we have any other questions? Anything that you all were hoping to gain, to be able to take back? I know, like I said, we had a lot of caseworkers, social services types of things, organizations. So if there's anything that we didn't answer, we have our expert here. Let us know if there's anything that you were hoping to take away but didn't have answered yet. We still have a few more minutes. Anyone? The other thing I was going to offer up, just from my personal experience, that immediate family member, and I'm not sure this would work for everyone, but he says that he, in the moment of urge, would play the reel all the way through, sort of like a movie, and you know the ending, and he knows that the ending was, you know, losing money, losing friends, losing family members. And when he, you know, got past that medium spot where, oh, you know, this is such a great feeling, and then got to the very end where it was a really bad feeling, that kind of helped set him on his recovery journey. So
that's a phrase or terminology you'll hear a lot in treatment and residential communities, therapeutic communities, AA. You hear that phrase used a lot. They remind each other, play it through, play the real thing. Mm-hmm.
Yes, AA was what he went through. So definitely important. Donna did mention in the email that we send out, we have put together 10 tips. Donna was kind enough to provide 10 tips to help people stay sober through the holidays. Some of them are just incredible, stuff that I didn't think of, but it makes sense. You know, if you do find yourself at a party where there is alcohol, your plan B could just be to make sure you grab a cup with water or Sprite, just, you know, in it, so that people won't keep asking you, you know, oh, do you need a drink? Can I get you a drink? Here, let me fill up your drink. I thought that was a great tactic. So we'll make sure that we send that out with the webinar recording as well. Any other questions? I think that wraps it up for us, Donna. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us. Again, Peace River Center offers substance use treatment services, and we also, our 24-hour crisis line can handle, you know, urges to use. So please encourage and give that number out to all of your clients. We are here to be a community resource, so let us know if there's any other specific things that we could do to help, you know, support you all in the community. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.